Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to You've Championed Yourself. Who are you? I'm Chris Ferguson, your host. It has always been a dream of mine to showcase ordinary people doing extraordinary things in their lives and for others. Those who have taken their dreams and their ideas and turned it into their reality. As they reach beyond their personal struggles, their pains, their traumas, where so many people give up, these people don't lose hope. There are the few that can walk through their obstacles and challenges. They don't know where it's going to take them. They don't know what's going to happen. They just trust themselves enough to not give up, to do the follow through in their personal life, their career, and in relationships. And this is what I call a champion in life. Today, I have an amazing individual. He's kind of like we were talking before we got started. We've got a lot of connections going on here. So it's going to be an amazing, amazing conversation. And I'm honored to have him here. His name is Stephen Garvin. Let's welcome Stephen to the podcast. Hey, young man.
Hey, Chris. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I just met you last night. I didn't even get you in a breakout room. So I'm really honored and excited to have you here. With all the people I interview, I always want to talk and start with their backstory, where they were and where they are now, and that journey that got you to be who you are now.
Sure. Well, you mentioned in the intro about how some people choose to keep going on even when they're confronting their dark night of the soul. I actually was facing my shadow side, was actually about to choose not to continue on that journey. And my trigger warning, I was about to go to the pharmacy to get what I needed to exit stage left. And before I went there, I stopped in the restroom and I hear this voice that says, "Don't use a permanent solution to solve a temporary problem." And that was enough for me to push pause and say, okay, well, I don't know exactly what that means, but this feels pretty permanent, feels pretty awful, and I don't know how to deal with this, but I will see what happens. And then fast forward about 3 or 4 months, and I get pulled into the HR director's office, and the HR director is very, very kindly saying, "We're having to let you go." And I'm literally biting my tongue because I'm so excited to be getting out of that environment. So I do my cartwheels out the door, figuratively speaking. And, I entered what I call the creative wilderness, which was, I'm no longer stuck in that environment, no longer doing the corporate accounting that I've been doing, no longer feeling, about that high, and no longer crying Sunday evenings because I know I need to go into work the next day. The awesome thing about being in the creative wilderness is that there's lots of opportunity to create and to do some cool things and do things that I had been putting on the back burner forever, that, I didn't feel that I had the right or the abilities or the skill to do. The challenging thing about being in the creative wilderness is that there's lots of opportunity and you can do lots of different things. And I had no idea, what was my path forward. So I had to, kind of figure that out and, look and see what is it that I really want to do. And part of what I really wanted to do was to start expressing the creative side of myself that I'd been suppressing for so long. One of the ways I describe it sometimes is it's, like if you've ever cooked in a cast iron skillet and you let it go for too long and you pull off the lid and there's a big mess that just flows out all over the place. So that's kind of what happened with me, and I had to clean up the mess and start, for probably the first time in my life, consciously start taking care of myself and practicing self-care and doing things that took care of me rather than me always taking care of either the messes or, whether those messes be people or problems or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
and just opening up and seeing, okay, well, what is it that I'm trying to do here? And one of the things that I came into there was, like I said, the creativity, and that showed up in lots of different ways, from paper mache to jewelry making to uh, painting and acrylics and watercolor and pastel, and eventually photography and writing. And I mean, it was just lots of really juicy, for me, fun things. And I got my hands dirty in lots of different ways, and it was a really cool experience. But I also had to figure, like, well, what's my central thread here? You know, what is the thing that I'm trying to pull all this together? How do I make the difference that I want to be making in the world? And I don't even know if I was actually at that stage at that time where I was thinking about, all I wanted to do was not be as severely and dangerously depressed as I was. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that was just honoring the things that my heart was calling me to do. And now, fast forward a bunch of years, going through lots of books, lots of coaches, lots of training, lots of journaling and self-exploration. Now I do things like, you know, I run the Senior Heart Song Summit, and I create books like Heart Notes, and my podcast is The Heroes of the Heart, and it's all about, you know, listening to that heart, that inner guidance, and expressing and sharing who we are and what we're all about, and being willing to share both the, you know, things that are recognized as being awesome, and also those things that are recognized both by ourselves and others as being possibly shameful, you know, and owning all of those things, that when we really open up to our story, that amazing things happen.
I love that. I love that. And you said it at the end, when you own it, all of a sudden you get clarity, because I teach my clients that the stories we tell ourselves and the excuses we make for ourselves is our perspective, and it becomes our perspective. But when we quit making those excuses for bad behaviors and for not being accountable and responsible for ourselves, it's just like this veil comes and pulls off your head. And it's like, well, I did have a different view of life now. And it wasn't as crazy as it was, but why was I labeling myself so easily to be going down a toilet bowl flush when I'm more valuable and worthy of that?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so like I said, but you know, I mean, um, when I had COVID here last year, I had a dark night of the soul. So I get it. I've been a shamanic practitioner for 45 years. And I had it. I was sleeping 17 hours a day, and I went through probably 9 days of the dark night of the soul. And I'm arguing with myself about all the negative stuff that I know I already dealt with. And it's like, why are you waking me up for this junk? This is over with. This is not an issue. Why are you trying to stir up junk? So I get it. I absolutely get it. And I've communicated this with my audience. And the thing is, I understand losing hope. I
Mm.
lost hope in my life. And most people don't know that. Well, in my audience, they know, but you might not know, because we just met yesterday, is that I had a near death experience at 4.
Mm.
And I drank some liquid plumber. It was
Oh my.
pink. It was under the sink. I was 4. I was hungry. You know, I couldn't open the refrigerator. I couldn't get to the higher cabinets. I just wasn't big enough. And they don't know why it didn't burn my esophagus and my throat and my, you know, intestines and stuff. But the one thing it did is the toxicity of my little body flatlined because it was over toxic.
Mm.
It was more toxicity than oxygen in my blood. And
Wow.
so the thing is that's how you flatline. Well, I'm 4. I'm up in this ceiling looking down at this person with all these people around. I can see him crying. I can see him tubes and all this other stuff. And then I go past the veils and I meet my creator. And he's looking at me like, child, what are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, this is so nice. I like this place. And he's like, oh, that's great, but you can't say, okay. And I just stood there. Evidently, he knew I was thick headed.
Mm.
So all of a sudden, I get palm pumped back into my body. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking up at the ceiling, looking for that person that was looking down at me. And so after that, it was like all these imaginary friends showed up. And that's what they always called it, was my imaginary friends, but they weren't imaginary, they were spirits.
Hmm.
And then at 8, well, my dad's Native American, my mother's white. My dad's an alcoholic, my mother was physically abusive. And in that, my dad decided to change his duty station and just did not come home, didn't tell anybody, just left.
Hmm.
And so society norms at that time in my life, back in the 60s when I was a young child, was a single woman couldn't raise 6 kids by themselves. So the Catholic Church says, let us help you. So I turned 8 in February. I had my first Holy Communion in May. And June 6th, my mother abandoned 6 kids in an orphanage that the Catholic Church had found for her to deposit us,
Hmm.
and walked away. So I knew the loss of hope at that moment. But at that moment, and in my book, Business, Life, and the Universe, Volume 6, I had a spirit guide come to me and say, oh, you're going to be fine. I'm going to be with you your entire life.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I'm glad somebody is, because I just got dumped,
Hmm.
and I'm 8 years old, and all of a sudden I'm getting wisdoms in my life I wasn't mature enough to understand.
Sure.
So I get the loss of hope. And most people don't realize that, wow, we didn't realize this happened to kids back in the 60s. It happened a lot. The
Yeah.
family unit totally disintegrated and started disintegrating in the 60s. And it's no wonder that now we have a hard time just being kind to people.
Hmm.
So getting back to you, I love your backstory, but how did you, well, one, you said you've championed yourself from low depressions to the heights of a life of love. And I'm in awe of that, because I've done the same thing. How
Hmm.
did you do that? Well, can you just, recap some of the things that you went through that were really life altering?
Well, first of all, I think it was more of there was the mindset shift of, whereas I had literally always been putting myself last, that I need to work, and the way that I create value is by working all the times, 7 days a week,
Mm-hmm.
from sun up to sundown, and into the early hours of the next day. That I realized that if I was going to get better, if I was going to overcome the struggles that I was having with depression, which incidentally started when I was a teenager, at least started when I was a teenager, that I needed to do things differently than I had been doing them. And that even with the support of a loving wife, and children who um, were considerably younger, I mean, they were early teens and, younger, um, that even with that support, because of the depression, I couldn't see any of that support. I couldn't see the love that was there. And I had to start being, as you describe it, my own champion, that I had to say, okay, I'm going to be there for you, for me, and I'm going to make myself a priority rather than the person that we finally get to when everything else is done. So I started doing things, I started doing yoga and meditation and journaling, and just really, but even more than those things, as helpful as meditation and journaling have been, and they've been incredibly helpful, as I'm sure you and your audience have experienced, that without that change in priorities, from realizing that the only way that I can share my light is to keep that light burning, in order for me to be there for others, I have to first be there for myself.
Mm-hmm.
That instead of saying, okay, well, I need to give all my energy out to other people, saying, well, I need to make sure that my energy is taken care of. So one of the things that I did, and coming from a corporate accounting background, one of the frameworks that I created in my mind was this idea of an emotional balance sheet, right? So we're familiar with financial balance sheets where there's assets and liabilities and so forth. In an emotional balance sheet, it's similar concept. You have your assets, you have your liabilities. The assets were those things that boosted my energy, the things that put me into a better place. The liabilities were those things that drained my energy. And by reducing those things that were draining my energy, cutting, being more intentional with the relationships that I had, if seeking healthy relationships with people, seeking opportunities to improve the relationships that I had, and letting go of those relationships that weren't working, the ones that no longer filled me or had possibly never had filled me. That by creating those, placing a priority and an emphasis on me being as healthy as I could be, that also changed the relationships that I had in my life, and it started really opening up to being in relationship with other people. At the time, I had been married, probably around 17 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
But I did not hang out with friends. I did not even view myself as really having any friends. I had acquaintances, but I didn't have people that I really cared about, or that really cared about me. And by starting to shift my relationship with myself, that also shifted my relationship with others, including my wife and my children and myself, and all the other people that I came in contact with. And another really essential part of that was being willing to talk about the things that aren't so easy to talk about, to speak from a place of truth and of power. And one of the ways that first showed up for me was I joined a Toastmasters club, somewhat reluctantly. I basically attended a club just to shut the guy who was inviting me to go, just to get him to be quiet. Okay, I went. Now leave me alone. And it turned out that it was a really fun club where the club president was actually a professional clown and, did comedy and so forth. So it wasn't the stuffy environment that I'd been imagining. But in that environment, I started to speak more regularly. And finally, 6 years after my struggle and near attempt at taking my life, I started speaking publicly about my struggle. And whereas I expected people to throw things, to get the rotten potatoes, that instead I got people standing up, and giving me standing ovations and just saying, your story is so inspiring. And I'm like, we're talking about the same story here, right? Because I don't get it. I mean, like, what do you find inspiring about what I'm talking about? And just having that community, that support, that not only, so I had the love that I had for myself that was developing. I also had the support of a community that continued to expand and to grow. And another pivotal moment for me was, and this was just, I can remember exactly where I was when this happened. I was sitting on my bed and I was struggling with depression again, and I'm beating myself up because I'm getting depressed again, which is like, doesn't even, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but
it's a catch-22. It's that evil cycle.
Right. It's like, okay, well, I'm bad. Okay, well, you should feel bad that you feel bad that, it's like, so I stopped that cycle and just said, okay, what if instead of being my biggest critic, I started to be my biggest cheerleader, and part of that was just accepting where I was at that moment, instead of like, oh, it's bad that I'm depressed, just accepting, okay, well, isn't this interesting? I'm depressed. Okay, that's interesting. Tell me like what's going on there, or and kind of getting into the story behind the emotion and getting into the story of what's working, what's not working. Every great story has conflict within it. It has a contrast of the things that go well and the things that don't go so well. And without both of those forces, it doesn't make for a very interesting story. If on page one, Prince Charming gets the princess,
yeah.
It's like, okay, well, done, next. And this is no story there. There's got to be some struggle. And part of my struggle was dealing with depression, and just accepting that was part of my story, that it wasn't a quote unquote a bad or a negative
Mhm.
emotion, that it was just an emotion. And like all emotions, it was uh, giving me information that I could use to get to a better place.
I like that, because the thing is a lot of people don't realize there's millions of people that are depressed in this world, especially in this country with all the pressures and the stuff going on. However, I loved your awareness that you had to bring you back and say, wait a minute, this is my feelings. This is not who I am. And there's a difference, and learning that awareness, because in your vulnerability, in that chaos and in that drama, that's where the growth happens. And most
Yes,
people don't understand that. And so when you're confused, that's amazing, because now all of a sudden you have the opportunity to grow from that. And like I say, and you said, champion yourself. It's a choice, because
absolutely.
the only one that can make you happy is you. I can't do it. Nobody else can do it. And if you're not happy, why?
Yeah.
What expectations are you having? What, just, but you were doing that. You were asking yourself those questions. What's this coming up? So in that process, you were getting the information, or the information was in you. You just hadn't tapped into it yet.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. In fact, I'm currently working on a book that this morning, I've had different titles over time, but the my current iteration of the title is The Untapped Voice. That when we tap into that voice, just like I talked about it, in the restroom, where don't use a permanent solution to solve a temporary problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I could have totally ignored that. I could have,
Mm-hmm.
gone ahead and done what I'd been planning on doing anyway. I didn't have to respond to that call to adventure. You know, and at any time we can say, I can't do this. I'm no longer the champion, or I never was the champion. But if we recognize that we are the champion, and that we do have everything we need in order to accomplish what it is we want to do, and what we've been kind of, I don't know, called to do, or assigned to do, however you want to look at it, that we wouldn't be given the calling if we didn't have it within us to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
continue to take that next step. Fall down 7 times, get up 8.
And it absolutely is true, because see, the thing is I was in law enforcement for 40 years,
Mm,
and I had no voice. I had no voice as a child in the orphanage. I had no voice. I had no voice in my life. And other people that became my childhood heroes spoke in their life what they were going through, and I could relate to it, because I didn't have a voice. I didn't have a choice. I felt like I was being bombarded and overwhelmed, and and I was being bullied unmercifully.
mm,
So the fact was is that I looked at those people and said, you know what? They're standing strong. They're speaking out. I can't speak, but I can stand in my power.
yes.
And so no matter what it was, and I had, thankfully, I had my spirit guides, and the people that came to support me weren't in this physical world, but they gave me more support than anybody that I didn't have in my world.
Yes.
And so I love that. But the biggest part that I love, Stephen, so much, or I think you go by Steve, don't you?
I do.
Okay, I'm
Either
sorry.
way is good for me. So
Okay. It's just that it's just your vulnerability as a male, because a lot of guys don't want to admit they have weak moments. They don't want to admit they don't have all the answers. They don't want to admit that, you know what, you got to own your junk.
yes, yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean,
And
our culture doesn't really accept or give space for that expression. And to be honest, I identify as non-binary, so I don't like normally fit in with like this is what a masculine. Well,
right.
that's part of me, but it's not all of me. But the thing is our culture really doesn't support and doesn't encourage. I don't think honestly anybody to really tap into the shadow side or the vulnerable side. I'm so grateful for the work that Brene Brown has done, to open up that conversation and for people to start looking at courage, at shame, at vulnerability, etc. And the conversation is beginning to open up to that, but there's still so much opportunity there for us to open that door further, both externally and sharing it in forums like you've created here, but also to look inwardly and say, I'm dealing with some really difficult things right now, and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with ourselves. There's the being vulnerable with others, with a close friend or a publicly or however. But I think that all that work really begins with, that the genesis of it comes from when we allow it for us to look within and to see, the frailty, the humanity, the challenges, and instead of shunning or belittling those things, having compassion for those things, and appreciating the heroism in our daily lives.
I agree. It takes a lot of courage some days just to get out of bed. So I always tell everybody, celebrate the small moments, because I promise you there's a reason why it's a moment in your life.
Yes.
Because the fact is, but see, here's so many people, when you were in the corporate world, I was in the corporate world, I worked for corporate security at one point, is that you had to be that chicken on the fire, and they turn up the heat and expect more and more and more. And you finally just said, I can't do this anymore. But you still forced yourself to go. And that's where the duality comes, because your heart's not in it. You're not that dancing chicken. And so all of a sudden now you're like, I'm doing the best I can with what I have, and I'm fighting just to show up every day for myself. And now you want me to show up for you? Yeah.
Yes.
And so I love the fact that, in your way of describing it, it was like, wow, it's the vulnerability we need more of. We need people to say, I'm not okay. And, we used to be able to do that in the 70s, and people would listen. And then all of a sudden things happen, and it's not about you. It's about us and what money and power and greed we can get from you and your work.
Yes.
So again, is it really culture, or is it social norms that's dictating that?
Yeah. And I'm not a sociologist, I can't, but exactly. It's like, do we allow ourselves, and do we allow other people in our space to feel what they feel? When, my sister recently lost her husband to cancer, etc. And she kept on telling me, I'm crying and crying and crying. And it's like, well, you know what? Allow yourself to feel what you feel, rather than trying to shove it aside. Allow yourself to be where you are. That, when we do go through a dark moment, rather than, putting on a smiley face and, pretending that it's not there, that when we acknowledge that, this might be a dark moment right now, acknowledging that and allowing it to be, because when we allow it to be, when we allow it to occur as it is occurring, is that we can get through it so much faster, right? That we can transform it so much more quickly, rather than, the old adage that what you resist persists, right? So that if you stop resisting, then it transforms.
And that's what happens. It is all my specialty when I worked in corrections was hostage negotiation, because I had the ability to talk people out of crisis. And then when I got into law enforcement, my specialty was criminal profiling, even though I worked with juveniles, troubled youth. None of these troubled youth knew that I was considered a delinquent, because I was an orphan. That's why I was labeled like that. So in that, and spent 21 years of my career helping out troubled youth and teaching them and showing them that they can change their circumstances. just by graduating high school. It gives them the first leg up in their life to become competitive with everybody else on the planet. It's the minimum, but it gives you a starting point to be able to step up from there, where a lot of people who just give up and drop out have nothing. And so they're not even a viable option or a competitive partner or competitive against anybody else.
Absolutely. And I think to go along with that and kind of continue the earlier conversation is, what would, if I had been more emotionally aware or emotionally intelligent as a teenager, just how much power that would have given me to,
Mm-hmm.
I imagine my life would have been very different than it has been. And I've had a pretty good life. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but dealing with without having the tools to deal with our emotional challenges, you
Mm-hmm.
know, rather, just pushing kids through school and so forth. Um, and I'm all for education. Um, but as part of that education, also educating the internal person, not just the external. That we help people to know that, if you're having a bad day, there are options you can take that are unhealthy options, and there are healthy options, and they're both available to us at any time. A lot of times we get stuck in, especially if we're in a depressed state, we don't see those options. It's like our window, our
Mm-hmm.
view gets really narrowed. But if we can, one, be there for ourselves, which is a little more challenging, but especially if we can be there for other people, if we can reach out and let people know that we're thinking about them and that we care about them, that,
Mm-hmm.
that we've gone through difficult times too, then we open those windows up. We help each other to see that even if there are difficult times in our lives, you know, I mean, your whole premise of your show, you champion yourself. Who
Mm-hmm.
are you? That sharing those stories,
Mm-hmm.
that when we share those story does amazing things, right? That I love the idea that when two people, a storyteller and a story listener, were both on I think it was an MRI machine, but they were basically doing scans of each other, of the two brains, as the storyteller was telling their story and as the person was listening to it. The exact same things were going on in both brains because of
Mm-hmm.
the mirror neurons that are present in our minds. That when we hear a story that we relate to, that we get the benefit of the person telling the story. So as we tell these stories, and there have been some really cool cultures, peoples, like the Native Americans, where story was such a huge part of their culture, and sharing that, passing the stories down to the next generation, that helps the next generation to grow, to develop, to
Mm-hmm.
become the people that they have the potential to be.
Well, see, the thing is, I agree, but most Native Americans or indigenous cultures didn't have written language.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't need it. That's why you see so many petroglyphs all over the world speaking of what they were going through and what they were experiencing, and they were doing it in pictures, like a
Yes.
picture book. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly. So I want to talk to you about this mission to be the bright light in someone else's dark. I love this mission. I love it.
Well, honestly, it's kind of what I've just been mentioning. That when we share our stories, whether it's and being the art lover that I am, I don't really care how you share the story. If it's through art, do it. If it's through written word, do it. If it's through oral and you're just, gathering the kids around, or, your friends around, sharing your stories, that there's power there. Uh, and having been through my own dark night of the soul, and my dark night of the soul lasted several years. I mean, it took me a while to go from wanting to end it all to no longer wanting to take the next exit. It it was a daily practice and a daily struggle for years. But having gotten through that and gotten to the other side, the thing that I wish more than anything is to be there for those people like myself when I was in that really dark spot. That and when as we allow ourselves to be there for each other, that we can help each other to get to a better place so much easier and more quickly than if we just every man for himself, the survival of the fittest type of thing. Well, the survival of the fittest is the person who's most connected, right? The people who have relationships, it's not necessarily just about the person who's got the biggest muscles or the biggest weapons or whatever. It's people who are really connected and listening to their community and creating a dialogue and opening up, just like like you're doing here with the show. That by creating these opportunities for us to share in this manner, that some really cool things can happen.
Well, I believe that a story can save somebody's life depending on the story. The examples that people realize oh my gosh, I'm not alone. You know what? There's other people depressed. They don't think, again, like you said, they have their limited views. It's distorted too, because they're listening to this inner chatter. And in that, they're not seeing that they're not alone in this boat. They're not the only one that's paddling. There's other people paddling too. But when you recognize there's more people like this, it's like, oh, so I'm not weird. I'm not abnormal, because that's the first thing we think when we think about ourselves.
Yeah.
We're weird. We're abnormal. And then we get this complex that says, oh, well, we're weird. We're that back in the 70s and 80s. Oh yeah. You're the nerd.
Yes.
Yes. And it's these labels.
And we isolate like that.
Yeah, you do. You want to go within, but you don't go within to reflect. You go within to protect.
Yes.
And so the thing is once you realize that, who knows that, people do lose hope every day. People give up on life every day. People give up on themselves all the time.
Absolutely.
But what if they heard one story? What if one kid heard a story that there was somebody that had a life worse than they did as a kid? And all of a sudden your life doesn't feel so bad, but you can empathize and you feel that emotion, that you can relate to the struggles. And it teaches them, wow, I don't have to give up. I don't have to say I'm done. I don't have to say or listen to this inner chatter of negativity that I'm not valued and worth. So this is why the first thing I did after I retired, I had a voice. I created this podcast and said, you know what? Humanity does so much bad stuff to humanity. But there's millions and millions of people out there that do amazing things every day. If it's just getting out of bed to show up for themselves, that's a celebration. I'm telling you, because in their mind, they're telling themselves something different. Yes. So the fact is it's okay not to want to get out of bed. It's okay to not feel your best, but you can't wallow in it, because then that becomes your norm. It's what you focus on, you become.
Yes, absolutely. And we have a choice, when we get to those points, we can continue to wallow and, circle down the drain, or we can use that kind of that same energy to go the other direction. It's like, we don't have to make dramatic changes in order to get to a better place. For me, one of the key ideas that I tapped into was just the idea of 1% incremental improvements. That if I can just make today 1% better than yesterday, that over time, over the course of a year, if you do that 1% incremental improvement consistently over the year, you go from a 1% improvement to a 3,800% improvement.
Absolutely. I use that theory dealing with gang members on the streets of Miami-Dade and Broward County, which is Fort Lauderdale. And the thing is in my mind, if I could get one kid out of gangs, I saw myself as being successful. Because a lot of the gangs, it's generational. Their whole family's involved. And to get them to step up and stand in their power takes a lot of courage.
Yes.
To break that chain of abuse takes a lot of courage. And people, instead, when they break that chain, they, well, I had to do it. I had to figure it out. No, you saved yourself. And again, Steve, this is how I'm seeing you, by making those different choices, by standing in your authenticity, by standing in your power. You saved yourself.
Yes.
And that's how powerful this conversation is. So I want to talk about the abundance story architect. We haven't talked about that yet. And you were kind of holding out on me, but it's like the universe knows me and they're saying, you can't hide it from her. You can't hide it. So can we talk about that? The abundance story architect? Because I
Sure.
love that.
Yeah. Well, there's two things about that. First of all, the architect came first. And when I was a kid, I would ride my bike around town and look for the neighborhoods with the coolest houses, right? I'd have forever been fascinated by cool architecture. And I actually, as a teenager and maybe even younger, my dream was to become an architect when I grew up. And that didn't happen, at least not in that way. But still, that principle of, that we like creating a blueprint, right? And I believe that our stories are our blueprints. The story that we carry around with us isn't just about the past, but it's also how we're creating the future. And we have at any time the ability to rewrite that blueprint in order to say, well, this is the house that I've created for myself, and it's a cozy cottage. Well, you can take that same blueprint paper and create a courageous castle. That it's the same energy, it's just the vision that we hold, right? And so if we tap into our stories and look at, like, what's at the essence of our story, what is the thing that we really want, who is it that we really are, and who is the people that we're really here to impact, that when we own that story, we can create amazing things, right? So we are the architects of our lives, whether we recognize it or not. The abundance part of it, when I left corporate accounting, I wanted nothing to do with money. I wanted nothing to do with numbers. I avoided going to the store. I avoided seeing numbers on, just because there was so much trauma around the numbers in my life. But about a year or two ago, I started to realize that I had the ability to rewrite that story. I've got a master's in accounting. I spent years in corporate accounting. I'm got a good head for numbers. I have the skills to create a more abundant story with regards to money, and just to life in general. And I read a book earlier this year, and I read a lot of books, but the book that I read earlier this year was a Happy Pocket Full of Money. And one of the things that it says throughout the book, there's three phrases or affirmations that it says repeatedly throughout the book, and that those affirmations are: I am abundant, I am wealth. No, I am abundance, I am wealth, and I am joy. Right? That it's not something to go get. It's not something that you either have or you don't. It is that we are abundance.
Mm-hmm.
We are wealth. We are joy.
Mm-hmm.
And the part of that I could really resonate with was the same person that was depressed and really struggling emotionally is the same person that is joyful today. I'm not, I might do things differently, but I'm still essentially the same person. And that abundance, that wealth that we desire in our lives, whatever that may look like, an abundance of happiness, an abundance of, really great stories, an abundance of love and connection and so forth. That abundance is always there, right? It's like you take a book, a novel, and you start at the beginning of the novel and you have your inciting incident and you go through the end of the book. Well, the ending of that book is there from the beginning. It's not like it's not separate from the book. It's part of the book. So wherever we are in our lives right now, right? If we are in the inciting incident where, the, everything kind of falls apart, we have the tornado that comes to town or whatever,
Or
that,
plants right atop your head.
yeah, that there's also the happy resolution at the end of it. It is they're there concurrently, right? And the same thing is true for finding our voice, for giving, to enjoying
Mhm.
relationships, to enjoying the abundance that we desire in our lives. It's there. We might not be on that page yet, but it's still there, and all we have to do is continue the story that we're on, and living into that realization at the end.
I like that. I love that because that's exactly what it is. When you step out of your own way and you step out of your limiting beliefs, your picture changes. All of a sudden, you're not as fearful as you were before. You're not as apprehensive as you were before, and you're willing to take a step forward, closer to that door, closer to that threshold, to where then all of a sudden you can get through the threshold and out into a whole different picture of life. And so that's, I love that. It's just that so many people get caught up in reality and all the craziness going on in it, and it's censored. It's
Mhm.
censored. We're told about what they want us to know. We're not told about what they don't want to know. I quit watching TV as far as the news and all of the junk going on, because it was like, it looked like a pissing contest. And there's no other word I can use than that. And then it was pointing fingers. And it's like, you know what, folks? You point the finger this way, they point the finger back. But guess what? You will both have fingers pointing back at you
Mhm.
as what you could have done to change this or made
Absolutely.
it better for society,
Yes.
or understood compassion and done the right thing instead of the control and the power and the greed thing.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I stopped watching the news, I don't know how many years ago, but a long time ago as well, just for that same reason. We get to control what's on the screens of our lives, whether that's our internal theater, or whether it's, the small screen or the big screen, or whatever. We don't have to play the stories, the news stories, the depressing stories, you
Mhm.
know, the discouraging stories. We can choose to play a more empowering, more enlivening, more abundant story.
Mhm. And I agree. So the fact is with all of that happening around us, again, it's our choice. And how empowering is that we have a choice? And most people don't see it that way. But when they make a different choice, it's very empowering.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about self-care. I'm all about self-care. I'm all about self-care. And let's talk about self-care. How do you help your clients with self-care? And what do you practice yourself?
Well, self-care is huge, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, then we can't really take care of our others. That if we aren't in our best, then how can we give our best to others? And self-care is something that we have to prioritize, because it's so easy for our day to get filled up with all kinds of
Mhm.
other things. If we don't make a priority for us to and whatever your self-care practice is, the important thing is that you're taking care of yourself. That I mean, for me, it's meditation and yoga and going for walks and reading and those types of things. And I do make them a priority. It's how I start out my day. It's I spend the first couple hours of my every day is doing those self-care activities, so that like, for instance, this morning I woke up kind of feeling low, and I could have just kind of wallowed in that, or I could do like I did, and do the meditation, do the reading, do the things that bring my energy up and help me to get to a better place. And by being in that practice of doing that, it helped me to get to the point where I could show up on the different calls that I've had today. That it enables me to be there for myself, but also for other people.
Mhm.
That if you think of every relationship you have in your life, there's one thing that is true about every one of those relationships. And that relationship can be with your money, it can be with the work you're doing, it can be with your neighbor, it can be with a partner. But in all those relationships, you are present in that relationship, right?
Or you should be. You should be.
Yes, but you are a key member of that relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
we have the opportunity to be present too. So, existing in that relationship, but we also have the opportunity to be present in the moment, aware and mindful about where we are in that story. And as we talked about earlier, when we own our stories, when we own, whether we're in the dark night of the soul right now or at a happier time in the story, that both of those places, when we are present to what's going on there, we have so much more power to us, right? I love the idea that I heard a while ago that comedy is tragedy plus time, right? And I loved hearing, I think it was Kat Navarro, a comedian, who said when she had cancer, she said, I'm in the tragedy portion of this comedy, getting this bad news. Well, give me some time and I will get to a better place. That all we have to do is keep the story going, and we will get to a better place. It's when we
It always does. The thing is when you have so much junk to unload, and a lot of people do. A lot of people go through childhood, and it's not so cool. A lot of people go through midlife or go through life, and it's struggle after struggle after struggle, pain after pain after pain. And at some point, they go, "Man, when is this all going to change?" And that's when they realize I have the ability to change it.
Absolutely, yes.
And so I love the fact that um, in all of this, you talk about in your which is self-care, but the book that you briefly mentioned, but I want to talk about it. It's your book about the heart notes. And I
Yes.
love the fact that people are speaking from the heart. And so can you give me the full title of that for me, Steve? And let's
Sure.
talk about it.
Yeah. So it's Heart Notes, an anthology of inspiring letters to matters of the heart. And what it is a collection of 29 people that came together to write heart notes. And what a heart note is a letter to, whatever the matter of the heart is that you're addressing. So I have 3 heart notes of my own in this book. I have a heart note to money. I have a heart note to little wins, and I have a heart note to abundance. And there are other heart notes in there, like some people there are heart notes to voice. You know, there's a heart note to anger. There's a heart note to grief. There's a heart note to numerous to their inner child or to their future self. That when we open up that conversation with our heart, that amazing things can happen. When we open up to reconnect to what's at our core and what we're really feeling, then amazing things really can happen. It's when we shut that door, and keep our heart locked away, protecting it, that actually, in closing off our hearts in an effort to protect ourselves, that's actually when we oftentimes do the most damage to our heart.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Thank you about that. I love your book, and I recommend everybody get it. Um, if you just want to get beyond yourself, get beyond that moment you're having, look at how people are speaking from their hearts and sharing it, because in those moments you never know where that golden nugget's going to come and just be there in your life and say, wow, I never thought of that, or I haven't thought about that in years. I need to do that. And that's the love of books. And that's the love from the authors. So I absolutely agree. So now it's time for 3 tips for my audience, Steve. 3 tips just off the hand, what they could do today to make a difference in their life.
Well, first tip, and I mentioned this earlier, is make yourself a priority. That in making yourself a priority, some people think that is a selfish act. It's actually one of the most selfless things you can do, because it allows you to be more generous with those around you. So the second tip would be, in making yourself a priority, actually schedule time on your calendar so that you can spend time with yourself. Because the most important relationship that you have in your life is the one that you have with yourself. And the third one is, as you make yourself a priority, spend time with yourself, is that you also open the door and share that with other people. You know, people really want to know the real, authentic you, not just some cardboard cutout version of you. And that, you know, includes both the celebration moments, but also includes the times when we're struggling. You know, because we all want to be of service. We all want to make a contribution, and part of that being able to work is that we allow ourselves to be contributed to.
I love that. And that those are amazing because it is about, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're speaking my heart song, because I also teach my clients boundaries because they don't have boundaries. And if you don't set your boundaries for yourself, if you don't teach people how to treat you, that's with your boundaries, you're going to get dumped on.
Mm.
And just a simple, people build up walls and they get blind spotted, to the side. And they're like, man, I had my wall up to protect me. And it was like, yeah, you built it so high, no, you couldn't see what was coming at you.
Yeah. You know, I talked to an architect, like a real, the what you would normally think of when you think of architects, designs houses and buildings and schools and all that kind of thing. What his process was when he first starts out on a project. And he said one of the very first things he does is figures out what the boundaries are of the project, because without knowing what those boundaries are, you don't know what you have to build on.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. I love that. And it's true. It's absolutely true. So, okay, I ask this of all my people that I interview. It's that time. It's that moment where I want you to sit back, relax, take a deep breath in, close your eyes, and connect with your 5-year-old inner child. And what would they say of you today and how far you've come?
Hmm. So what is coming to me is, the 4 words, I get to be me. I think that's 4. Maybe that's 5. But anyway,
you got it. 4 words.
Is that when we allow our inner child to come out and to play and give that child, and honestly, I mean, we're talking about ourselves, but allowing that inner child part of us to come out and to play and to enjoy life, that amazing things happen. So often we want to push that inner child. And when my therapist introduced me to the idea of an inner child, I said, hell no, we're not going there. And it took some convincing for me to open up to entertaining that idea of, what is it like for me to be my inner child? How do I be in this place? And when I did, it created an opportunity for one of the most precious relationships in my life. That, rather than resisting and tucking our inner child away, that by inviting our inner child into our lives, that amazing, beautiful things can happen. And we get to be ourselves fully.
But your inner child is so proud of you because you didn't give up. You thought about it, but you didn't give up. And they said you had walked some really tough times and you were doing so much harm to yourself with your thoughts that they were actually, you had this dichotomy going on within you that you weren't seeing clearly. And that's why you were listening to the inner chatter. And they finally said they did what they had to do in your life to bring that voice to you.
Yes. Yes.
And so they were like, thank you for listening. Thank you for accepting. Thank you for allowing it so that you could tell your message so that this could help somebody else. And I truly, truly believe that if you tell your story, and I used to think it before, it's like, okay, I had a shit life. You know what? Everybody has a shit life. Mine's no different than everybody else's, but it was different than everybody else's. And recognizing that it was different. And then I was ashamed that I was an orphan, that nobody loved me. To recognize that story in me, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to tell nobody that. I'm going to become my best version of me, and we're just going to push that to the side for right now. And it was just like, okay, no, we can't do that. That's part of that's my foundation. That's where I come from. And that was the lesson I had to learn in life. And who would taught me that well enough, but with children. So the kids, when you're with kids, man, and they're street kids, they'll call you out on your junk if it's fake. And they know when you're not real. So it's like, okay, so they never knew I was orphaned. They never knew I was a street kid. They just didn't know how to interpret me because I knew more than they knew. Yes. I had that compassion for their path, their journey. They didn't know it was my journey too, at a different time.
Sure. Yeah. And honestly, that's true for all of us. We never really know what each other's paths or each other's stories until we open up to sharing or receiving those stories.
So I got it. I thank you, Steve. I knew this was going to be an amazing conversation. I could sit here and talk to you all day and just continue bringing out all the important things in life that people overlook. So I love that you have your book, The Heart Notes, and I love the fact that you're the abundance story architect. And that just speaks volumes of how far you've come in your life. And I want to honor you for that, because sometimes we don't honor ourselves enough. We don't celebrate enough. And the fact is the biggest thing to do, I had to forgive myself for all the thoughts that I had. And I finally said, you know what? I was going on what I knew, not what I understood. Just what I knew. And it was limited.
Yes.
So I'm human. I'm flawed.
Yes. As we all are.
Exactly. But the thing is until you do that, you have these people walking around like peacocks thinking that, there's something different, something better. Let me tell you what, it doesn't matter your economic status. It doesn't matter your social demographics. It matters on you, how you think. And I love the fact that mental health is coming out in society more back to where it used to be, instead of that, they're crazy.
Yes.
They used to label people, you're crazy all the time. So it's like, okay, no, we can't do that. Let's get to the core of the problem.
Yes, absolutely.
So I thank you for being here, Steve.
You're so welcome. I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity.
It takes a special kind of individual to dream and to communicate their thoughts, their ideas, turning it into the reality. Steve, Garvin, you have done that. You've stepped past your fears. You stayed the course, and you had the courage to do the follow through all the way to now. Steve Garvin, you've championed yourself. Now we know who you've become. Thank you for sharing your ideas, your thoughts, your dreams, and your inspirations of being of service for others. Celebrate you every day.